Welcome on a Wednesday night. My good friend up north is joining us. Getting ready for a snowstorm. Welcome to Generation Movies. My name is J.W. Colwell. Tell me you got a snowstorm coming, correct, Rich?
Tomorrow, yeah. Supposedly rolling in like late morning or so. And we're under, I think, a winter storm watch until Friday afternoon or something like that. Something crazy. I'm just working from home for the next couple of days, staying in the sweats and, doing a lot of
Rich
cooking.
Drees is such a film buff online genius that he doesn't. Oh, yeah. Part of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle, right? Okay, so how was your week? Good week?
My week was good. Can't say the same for Henry Cavill.
Maybe Henry Cavill maybe he survived something he didn't need to. Okay, so what Rich is talking about?
Yeah, breaking news, literally.
Breaking news. It actually just happened like in the last 2 hours. Because I just got done with Loud Nerdy, and then you sent me a message, so it kind of happened in the last 2 hours. So
James tweeted this at 8:49 Eastern.
Yeah, I was already off, so you can't hold Loud Nerdy responsible for this. But basically, what Rich is talking about. First off, welcome everybody. We'll do the news first, but let's do the important stuff first, so Rich doesn't yell at me again. He yelled at me that one time, and I never forgot it, and I don't want to be hit with the nose again like a dog. Okay, so if you like the Indie Escape Network, we have a bunch of very talented people on this network. A lot of shows going every night. We have great people running things. If you like the content, you can subscribe on our YouTube channel. This show now has its own YouTube channel as well, so please like and subscribe. Also, there's a Facebook page, Indie Escape Network on the Facebook page, also very prominent. There is a poll on that Facebook page as we speak that begs the question, what James Bond film made by Sean Connery would you like us, I should say canonical James Bond film made by the Broccolis, would you like us to look at in a generation movie kind of way, is the best way to describe it, the way we look at everything, the way we break it down. And the options are there. They're all available to you. The posters are there. Super nice. Have a really nice write-up. Please go to the Facebook page and vote on that if you want to get whatever Bond film you've got. Got a couple votes, not a lot. I'd like to get some more. Goldfinger already has a vote, of course, because it is Goldfinger. But in breaking news, before we get to the movie tonight, which I'm very excited about, and I think anybody who grew up in the 80s is super excited about it, although not necessarily for the same reasons, but we'll talk about it. Breaking news out of Hollywood is that, as many people know, James Gunn and Peter Safran have taken control of the DC cinematic universe for David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery. And they have several missions ongoing, but basically an option to get 10 years into it a la Marvel. Basically, they're they're kind of building it, and Gunn comes from the Marvel family. He's coming over after Guardians of the Galaxy 3 in May, but he's already started working. And what's going to happen is we've seen a series of news stories in the last couple of weeks. Last week, it was a big news story that Patty Jenkins was not being retained, or her version of Wonder Woman 3 isn't being retained, which led to questions about Gal Gadot. Patty Jenkins responded today. That was part of Loud and Nerdy. She responded today where she said, I'd never want to walk away from Wonder Woman. It's one of my favorite things I've ever produced. And the last movie kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. I want to make sure that we get to progress with stories about Diana. So there's that. Earlier in the season, in October, I think it has to be prefaced that Henry Cavill made a very large, very big appearance at the end of Black Adam that was kind of awesome. I mean, it's probably the best part about Black Adam in every conceivable way. Not to mention the fact that they finally did the justice of giving Henry Cavill the John Williams score undertones on his sequence, which is nice. And basically, so they brought a lot of stuff back and did things. But tonight, Rich, on Generation Movie, drop your bombshell, drop the story that just dropped from James Gunn and confirmed by Henry Cavill on his Instagram page.
Yes. James Gunn, just like we said, a little over an hour and 20 minutes ago now, confirmed that while they can't announce all of their plans yet, that will come in the new year, Gunn, is writing a new Superman film.
An origin
doesn't
story.
Doesn't say it's going to be, well, he doesn't say origin story.
Younger
he says,
years.
Our story, and I'm quoting here right from the tweet, in the initial stages, our story will be focusing on an earlier part of Superman's life. So the character will not be played by Henry Cavill. So
that's a bit.
Obviously, Cavill has been let go from the role of Superman. Now, I do want to point out that when there was the whole big to-do about Cavill returning for Black Adam, that was before Gunn and Safran had taken
over.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, the other interesting thing that you can kind of piece together, and it was also part of a Variety article in the last couple of days. Safran and Gunn do view Matt Reeves' Batman, the Batman, with Robert Pattinson, as a remarkable success, and there is ongoing talks that he will be part of the DC universe proper. That's a rumor, right? That's
a rumor. Gunn shot that down earlier today.
Okay.
So what Matt Reeves is doing over, with Batman in his little corner of the world is its own separate thing.
Well, but that's interesting to me. I think that might be a red herring. That might be a red herring. Because think about it. If you're doing a younger Superman, and this version of Batman is hella younger, right? Pattinson is really young for the Batman, right? He's just at the beginning of his crime fighting days. We don't have villains are established, but they're not necessarily there yet. And whoever they pick for Superman, I mean, this is going to be the biggest casting call.
Oh, it's going to be insane.
It's going to be crazy. Everybody and their brother is going to want to be Superman.
Now, Cavill did go on to Instagram
and
within the last hour as well. Confirmed, everything. He said, again, I'm going to quote right from his post here. I have just had a meeting with James Gunn and Peter Safran, and it's sad news, everyone. I will, after all, not be returning as Superman. After being told by the studio to announce my return back in October, prior to their hire. This news isn't the easiest, but that's life. The changing of the guard is something that happens. I respect that. James and Peter have a universe to build. I wish them and all involved with the new universe the best of luck and the happiest of fortunes. And so he understands this is how Hollywood sometimes works.
And he also has a great quote in his Instagram about the idea that while he's no longer playing Superman, it doesn't mean that the cape and the cowl aren't there, and not the cape and the cowl. The cape still stands for the same things that it stood for before. The idea that Superman, while he may be gone as Superman, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That Superman is still there. What he stands for is still there. So I think this is an interesting kind of like turn of events. But what I said to you before we got in the show tonight, and then we'll get to some comments. What I said to you in the show is, I think Safran and Gunn got there and realized that the giant gangrenous limb that is the Snyderverse fandom and the Snyderverse contingent and everything that's kind of seeping through the pores of DC, they just have to cut that thing off and cauterize the wounds. If you have Cavill, because here's what happens. Cavill comes in, he plays Superman. Let's say it's the best Superman movie that's ever been, right? Not that it could ever happen, because Lord rest his soul, Christopher Reeve is the greatest Superman of all time.
True. And just this past couple of days was the 44th anniversary of the release of Superman
the movie. Yeah, we were talking about that. This is really good news.
Put my feet up and watched that Saturday night and just loved it again.
But what I would say is, I think that limb has to be cut off, because if, let's say, Cavill comes in, plays Superman for Gunn and Safran, right? Does one or two movies, they're great movies. Then what you have is you have competing factions. Well, look what they did with Superman versus look what Snyder did. And the Snyder group is very, you and I both know this, and you and I, they're one of the most toxic, horrible fan bases going.
Not all of them, but the loud portion of them is. And honestly, I wish, some of the ones who weren't sending death threats to Warner Brothers executives and
causing them to hire extra security.
Yeah. And
an internal threat, viewed as an internal threat.
Threatening reviewers, threatening, news reporters, things like that for, lying, and, completely losing their shit over like some of the Hollywood Reporter reportage about what had happened behind the scenes with everything. Those guys, the other fans who weren't doing that stuff really should have stepped up more to police their own, frankly. And they're just like, well, we can't do anything. I was like, you're kind of tacitly endorsing.
But this also, like, a couple things that Gunn and Safran doing this. This is like ripping the Band-Aid off, although they have a very large wound underneath because they still have 4 movies, Rich. I talked about this earlier. We're talking about Zaslav. We're talking about Zaslav trying to cut money. We have 4 movies that are still in the pipeline that are definitely coming out in 2023. Right? You have Shazam and the Fury of the Gods. You have Shazam and the Fury of the Gods. You have The Flash. You have Blue Beetle. And you have Aquaman and the Lost City of Atlantis, right? So you cannot say they're going to be terrible. And you cannot, because you don't want to submarine those movies before we get there, right? No. I mean, The Flash already is like kind of toxic, and we're going to be fighting about that the moment we release that. But the other movies haven't done anything bad, and Safran is internally tied to both Shazam and Shazam 2, right? Safran, it's part of his baby. His actually, the reason he got this job was because he spearheaded 2 of the more successful DC films, the Aquaman film and Shazam, right? So he doesn't want to submarine those movies, not to take it away. It's a really tough position for Gunn and Safran to be in. They're gonna step on toes, and they're gonna hurt some people, but it doesn't matter if they pull everything out of the fire, Rich. If they pull it out of the Snyderverse fire, nobody will care. Nobody will give a shit.
At this point, I think, if they kind of, Flash is the first week of June, I think. I kind of wish they'd push Flash back to November, roll everything first, and then have hopefully Flash would end with some kind of universe reset, and then we can go forward from there. Because I think that's honestly what we're looking at this point.
I think they already have something filmed for the end. They already have something filmed for the end of Aquaman. They already have something filmed for the end of Aquaman. So I think that's going to be the end of this and the reset, because they're already talking about, like, Gunn had one interview where he said Momoa is great as Aquaman, but I didn't envision him as Aquaman when I was thinking about casting. And it's like, well, who are you thinking about? He's like, I think Momoa would make a great Lobo. And it's like, he would make a great Lobo. That is a true statement.
But I don't see if you're starting your cinematic
you don't
universe
cast anybody
right.
again.
Yeah, don't throw Lobo in until like about year 4 or 5.
But we have some comments. Let's do some comments, and then we'll get to tonight at hand. Ken McCurney. Good evening, friends.
Good evening, Ken.
Oh, finish your statement. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. I honestly think we're going to see a hard reboot.
It's gonna be drastic.
Yeah, and
because I think what happened was they took.
Fortunately, that's the only way to get out of this mess at this point, which sucks because I have loved Shazam. I love Shazam. I'm looking forward to Shazam and the Fury of the Gods. And the thing that bums me out though is we won't get a third Shazam movie because I don't think that promise of the end credits scene in Shazam in the first Shazam movie with Mr. Mind showing up.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was incredible.
Mr. Mind, for God's sakes! I want to see the little worm with the telepathic powers.
And maybe that's the key. Like finding where Gunn and Safran are going to take things from. I think we are going to get a hard reboot, but I think Shazam. I will say Shazam and the Fury of the Gods, and even to a lesser extent Aquaman. Even though Aquaman's from the Snyderverse, they have a different vibe. They have more of a Gunn vibe.
Yeah, they're fun.
And Peter Safran vibe. You know what I mean? So maybe it's not as hard as we think it's going to be. Maybe they'll pick and choose. But I think the reason you get rid of these people, the reason you get rid of Cavill and Momoa and Godot, and you have to get rid of the limb that has gangrene in it. You have to get, because Snyder is so negative and everything Snyder does is all backwards. And it's just, he's just like sitting in his house with like reels that say, lost Justice League footage and causing all kinds of chaos. And I just think they're going to come in, and I think they got in there, Rich, and to God, my right hand to God, I think they got in there and just said, this is a bigger fucking mess than, like I think about a guy that's worked with Kevin Feige for 10 years, walking into DC offices and just looking at things going, well, where's the wall? What wall? We don't have a wall. You don't have a wall with the storyline?
Mm-hmm.
Nope. No, we don't have that. Whatever filmmaker comes in, they just make whatever the fuck they want. But what about the overarching story about the whole universe? No, we don't have a wall. Do you have a dry erase board? Nope. Don't have any of that. Nope.
I would take issue a little bit with that. There has been reportage that Hamada had been working towards doing some sort of variation on Crisis on Infinite Earths at some point. And so he might have had an idea of how he wanted to get there. I don't think it was readily apparent. I think we were probably too...
the difference between a Hamada board and a Feige board is Feige has all the plot arcs and Hamada has Crisis, ? That's you'll never get me to believe anything else.
It's the Underpants Gnomes from South Park. It's
true.
Steel Underpants, ? Profit.
Okay, so good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken. Glad you're not banned on Facebook. We appreciate you having here. We have a storm coming in on Friday. Yeah, big storm. We have. We're going to be down in the 60s. It's going to be rough for us down here.
Oh my God! They're canceling school. I bet.
Joe Ridgely. Good evening, gentlemen. I'm a huge Superman fan and a collector. Didn't Cavill turn down the new season of The Witcher for Superman 2? Yes, no. He did. He didn't?
No, he was not happy, and he decided not to return for season 3. He was very upset with the production.
Yeah, I think Rich is right. It's more the Superman thing fell into his lap afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was a lot of backfighting on that show. We have the multiverse now. We can do any story. They can do Man of Steel 2 and do Super. No, Cavill's done. There is no Man of Steel 2. It is gone. The meeting happened today. It is over. People are, the Snyderverse people are out committing Harry Carey as we speak. Kathy Fraser. I mean, technically, it makes sense. It's going to be a younger
Superman. I'm afraid to open up Twitter to look. Honestly, I'm kind of like
it's going to be. Oh my God, a bloodbath. I mean, Kathy writes, I mean, technically it makes sense it's going to be a younger Superman. Why cast Cavill? Yes. But part of it, Kathy, and I think Rich and I would both say and stay on board with this before we get to the Dark Crystal, which is why we're here. Part of it is that for Rich and I know I'm not speaking for Rich, but I'm going to say what I think, and I think Rich is the same thing. Cavill never got his chance. Cavill never got his chance to have a fully visioned Superman movie because Man of Steel has a lot of plot construction problems. And I've talked about it with Rich. My biggest problem is that Superman is raised by a xenophobic Pa Kent, who is worried about the world looking in, and his Superman Pa Kent death is it's such a bastardization of the Superman mythos that it ruins the rest of the movie. Now, there are good parts in the movie, but Pa Kent dying is supposed to show that Superman, he can't save everyone. And the way Pa Kent dies in Man of Steel is he dies specifically in a way that Superman could save him.
Yeah. So I'll tell you this on the Pa Kent death. Again, just rewatch Superman the movie this weekend for the umpteenth thousandth time.
Glenn Ford dying is amazing.
Glenn Ford just going, oh no, and dropping out of frame. Just
holding his wrist. Holding his wrist. Oh no. Yes. Oh no.
And just that one walk from the street up to the barn with him and Jeff West as young Clark, as a teenage Clark Kent, being overdubbed by Chris Reeve, it's a great sequence. It's, just thematically encompasses what Superman is about. And then, it ends with that moment where we understand he can't save everybody. It rips my heart out every time. Man of Steel, I see Bull Durham there saying, no, I'm going to walk into a tornado. I think, dumbass. That's what I think. It's no emotional.
On his whole story up to that point, don't tell anybody about your powers. The government's going to get you. It's a whole thing that kind of Snyder, it permeates throughout the Snyderverse. One more question, and then we'll start on our movie tonight.
But yeah, Kathy's right. Why cast Cavill if we're going younger? If we're going to, especially if there's going to be a 10, 12-year plan, you're going to want an actor who's going to be not age as rapidly as Cavill, who's already in his 40s.
So is the younger Superman going to be based on Superman Returns?
It's been a while since I've seen you. I hope that things are well. He's a friend. So, we work together in the student loan industry.
Oh, that's nice.
Which is why we both drink now.
So is the younger Superman going to be based on Superman Returns? No, nobody talks about Superman Returns anymore. Brandon Ruth also didn't get a shot. Anyway,
he did in on the CW when they did the CW version.
Yeah. Yes, that was. He was one of the best parts of that. He had the best costume, by the way. That costume was fire. Let's see. As long as the new Superman isn't Nicholas Coppola, I got to tell you, Joe Ridgely, this is a great comment. As long as the new Superman isn't Nicholas Coppola, interesting comment, Joe. But I would also say to you, if you've seen, there is a documentary called I think it's called Superman Reborn or whatever.
It's called Whatever Happened to Superman Dies, or what happened to the death of Superman.
The death of Superman. I got to tell you, some of the shit behind the scenes, way more interesting than any of the Superman stuff we got. Now, I'm not a big Tim Burton fan these days. I think Burton is resting on laurels, and I would also argue to Rich that a lot of Wednesday has nothing to do with Tim Burton.
I would too. A lot of Wednesday rests firmly on the shoulders of Miller and Goff.
Yes.
The two masterminds behind Smallville. So there's
a whole Superman connection tonight. Yeah. But that's the key. The key, it wasn't as bad as you think it was. And I'd really watch the documentary because the documentary is amazing. Yes, and the Superman costume that Cage had was insanely cool. Mm-hmm. He looked great in it. Even though he was like a stick figure.
They show some test footage of Cage as Superman, like flying and landing, and
they also have
that whole picture of him in the costume, that costume test picture where it looks like he's he's stoned because his eyelids are. He was in the middle of a blink. They actually have video footage of that picture being taken, and
Yeah.
you can see where he's
Also,
blinking.
the concept in that movie was the villain was going to be Brainiac, and the footage they have of the ship designs, super cool. Just a giant skull floating through space, amazing. Eventually stolen and used in Guardians of the Galaxy. Anyway, all ties around back. Oh, Josie, I've seen it. I love that documentary. Anyway, tonight we're late, but that's okay. Tonight,
Yeah, sorry,
we have
one folks.
yeah, but it was a big news thing. Tonight we're looking at a quintessential piece of '80s kiddom, a fantasy film in the '80s. It's called The Dark Crystal. It is, the poster says it all. Another world, another time, in the age of wonder. It is a Jim Henson and Frank Oz production. It is still the only fully functional and fully directed puppet film ever made. Not a single person on screen. Not talking about weird stuff. But it's
Well, there's people in costumes, but they're not actually portraying humans. So
they're puppets, and even when they're portraying the costumes, but it's a great story, and it is one of those quintessential movies that if you were raised in the '80s, you saw this film at some point. So join us on as we join. Let's talk production, Rich.
yeah, Jim Henson has forever wanted to do, I don't want to say he was chafing at the idea of being, the Muppets being just kiddie stuff for Sesame Street, but they did start off, as more of a nightly, 15-minute nightly show in, I believe it was the local DC market in the 60s. And he wanted to get back to making something that was for adults and for families, not just kiddie stuff. So, he'd been kicking around for a while. They briefly, the first season of Saturday Night Live, had a recurring segment on the show for the first 13 episodes or so called The Land of Gorch. Jim Henson created like this alien world, a couple of characters, and then because of Writers Guild requirements, the Saturday Night Live staff had to be the ones who actually wrote the segments every week. And it wasn't a good mix. But you can see some very embryonic ideas in the Land of Gorch sequences from Saturday Night Live, coming to fruition ultimately in Dark Crystal. The idea of, this alien world, no humans.
I also like the idea that
Scred very much feels like that was played by Jerry. Shoot, I'm suddenly blanking on the Muppeteer's name. Feels very much like an early draft of the Skeksis. So I'm sorry, but go ahead.
I also like one of the concepts when you look at the production of this movie, the synthesis of it, the beginnings of it, the like where the stages where it started are very similar to Spielberg and E.T., right? It's a lot of it, early drafts are written, or at least a start is written when he's, staying with his kids in a hotel, and they write a story with his daughter called The Crystal, right? Where basically they come up with this concept and they envision it out of populating the world with all these different creatures from his character shop. And I was stunned that one of the things when I'm looking at it, right, basically at some point he sees a picture book. He wants to do a Grimm's fairy tale, right? He wants to go back to the visions of childhood, not necessarily being not unscary, right? 80s became a time when we had a lot of kids movies and animated things, and where they were scary. We did The Secret in Nim. This is in time in like lockstep with that. Henson and Oz were a big believer in making sure kids were afraid of things. The idea that you grow up a little bit better and with a little bit more semblance in your step, if you're worried about where the next step is going. And I found that fascinating. I also found it fascinating that when you're looking at it, when you're dealing with it, and you're talking about, I think one of the biggest is an illustration book by Leonard Lubin, right? And basically, one of Lubin's pieces in a Lewis Carroll poetry book is just a bunch of alligators in like suits of armor.
Yeah.
Right.
And
of course, no humans.
Henson also approached the fantasy illustrator Brian Froud, who, you know, this
incredible
film
production design
unmistakably bears his stamp in terms of all the design and stuff. And there were, you know, at the time in the 80s, there were art books of Froud's of his work for this movie that came out. And if you can track them down, they're just stunning stuff. Stunning.
Well, and
stunning.
that's the thing. Like, the production design is the world building, and the production design and everything built into it is absolutely insane. You know what I mean?
I would say this is probably the most comprehensive and imaginative original for cinema piece of world building that we have seen. From that point, it remains unrivaled up until like 2009 when Avatar came out. I mean, between 1982 and 2008 or so, nobody could touch what Jim Henson and company were doing in this movie.
The only one that could touch it, the only one, it's going to be our legacy. The only one that could touch it is Henson himself, because he does it again with Labyrinth. Right.
I love Labyrinth, but I don't think Labyrinth is as intricate a piece of world building as this is.
Because he has pieces. You're right. But I think like I was saying, it is what it is. It is pieces where you look at it and you just go, you know what I mean? Like, anyway. Okay. So Joe's commenting, we need the show before this one on our network too. And he stuck out his tongue. I'm working on it, Joe. I'm working on it. Joe, you need a movie news show. That's the show he's talking about, Ken. And then Ken also writes, the 80s was awesome for fantasy movies. Yeah, it really was. We've had more substantial fantasy movies, like with Lord of the Rings. When Lord of the Rings hit, they became more. Lord of the Rings and Potter kind of dominated the proceedings lately.
We've been doing this for what? About 6 months now, and we've covered, in just this, for the year of 1982, we've covered Conan, Dark Crystal,
Secret of NIMH.
Secret of NIMH. I'm not sure I'd qualify that as a fantasy movie, but we didn't do Kroll.
You figure rats with magic powers isn't fantasy?
Okay, I take that.
Okay, you know what? Oh, hey, I'll step back.
That's absolutely grounded in reality.
I just work here. They don't even know what the fuck they're doing with the magic. Okay, fair. They haven't gone to Hogwarts yet. But you're right about the world building, and the world building is stellar. And the idea that he saw this guy's concepts in a painting book, that had to do with fairy tales, and then he brought him in to work on the production design. It's pretty impressive, right? And so the other thing about the design is that when he's working on the Skeksis, like, one of the big production parcels you look at is that Henson is working on way bigger things than anybody. Like, when he's doing the script, or when he's talking about the Skeksis and he's talking about the mystics, when you focus on the duality of man, that there are pieces of us that are evil and there are pieces of us that are good, and when you mix this together, we're usually better people, right? Or better, more enlightened species. The idea that you're doing this in a family children's film in 1982 is pretty impressive. When you're making the production, when you're making this movie, and you're putting all these big themes in, the duality of man, the idea that you can have good and bad, the idea that his entire race is wiped out until he notices a new, until he finds Kira later in the movie. Jen is an orphan, has been raised by, his entire race has been wiped out, or so he thinks. Right? And there is, things in this movie, production wise, where they weren't stopping Jim Henson from doing anything. Like the little pod people that they put in the cages and they just take them back and then they suck the life essence out of them and then they make them slaves. And it's like,
You mean
it's
you mean the
dark,
proto
Rich.
dozers from Fraggle Rock?
They look like doozers, and then their eyes go white, and you're just like, holy shit. Like, mommy, why are they sucking the life essence out of that people? To feed it to the emperor so he can get new and young. And it's like, Jesus Christ. Where you're like looking at it, but the production design is so astounding. Every little thing, like the world is well built. The everything about it is just
it doesn't talk down to the
beautiful.
kid in what he's dealing with thematically. I will say though that again on rewatch earlier this week, I was kind of struck by. This is going to sound heretical. I think the script itself, in terms of dialogue, is kind of weak.
It's a mess.
It's a
no,
mess.
it's not hereditary. No.
They repeat things often. Like the voiceover will say something, and then a character will just repeat it like 3 minutes later.
Not to mention the fact that the entire first 10 minutes of the movie is it's so dense with narration that if you don't hear the narration and you somehow are paying attention to something else in your house, or a child might ask a question about the last sentence that occurred, which may or may not have happened this week, Rich, while watching this movie. What happened to this? What happened to the Gelflings? Okay, let's see if we can answer. They're not here anymore. And so, but I think you're right. The script, like, it's one of the biggest things about the movie, and I think it's something that has to be taken into account, is that in all this production design, down to the very armor the Skeksis wear, to the clothes that the Mystics wear, to the ornate symbols on Jen's outfit, to how the Longstriders move, all of those things take very much a center stage versus a very basic script, which is find a rock, put the rock back in the other rock, and don't get killed or captured.
It's a very simple fetch quest. And the one thing that really struck me was, and I had to laugh as I was watching it, Jen gets to Augura's place, which, by the way, that set it's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
That planetarium.
The coolest planetarium ever put on film.
Yes. And, he goes, well, what am I supposed to do with this crystal? She's like, I don't know. And then as soon as and just right before, once he figures out which one is the right crystal, she goes, oh, okay,
playing his
now
flute.
here's what you have to do.
By playing his flute.
She said she knows what to do with it. And like 5 minutes before, she's saying, I don't know what to do with it. It's like the script makes no sense.
No, and that's the thing. I think the biggest thing about the movie, it's its own tragic flaw. We're getting to it before we get to the critical reviews, but it's its own tragic flaw. The world building is so meticulous that the script is not as meticulous as the world building. So it's, as we've gotten older, it is innately more noticeable that the script isn't as well built as the world is. Right?
I think we kind of forgive it because we're just so entranced with that world.
Yes, it's. I would argue the week that we're dealing with, it is one of the reasons why Avatar is going to gross $1.5 billion or whatever it's going to do.
It's going to do gangbusters. And my review just dropped yesterday on FilmBuff Online. I saw it last week.
I would argue it's the same argument.
It's insane.
I would argue it's the same argument. It's whatever we're immersed in, and I think with this movie, I think the thing about it also is, if you're a kid, it's a challenge, right? I mean, it's a bit of for an hour and a half movie, it's a bit of a slog. There's not a lot of talk. There's there's a lot of narration, which kids love because they read books and that's what they get in books. But if they miss any of the narration, or like, I'll give you an example of a scene that I don't think is particularly well written, and jumping on your thing, okay? There's a sequence where they find the Gelfling village that is completely destroyed. There is no remnants of the Gelflings except for a giant prophecy that happens to be on the main wall of the first house they walk into. And not only does it give away the entire movie, right? It literally gives away the entire movie on the wall, right? Kira can't read. So Jen's reading because he's been taught by the mystics. So like as an adult, you're watching it going, well, why is it written in mystic? Like why? Like Kira knows Gelfling. She speaks Gelfling. Jen doesn't speak Gelfling. So the idea that they walk into a house where the mystics have written all the stuff on the wall, you know what I mean? Like it's a big plot hole.
I like one thing in that scene though, where he goes, "Oh, this is writing," and she's like, "Well, what's writing?" And he describes the written word as words that stay. I thought was a beautiful turn of phrase.
Oh, there are beautiful things in the script. There are beautiful things in the script.
But like, to your point too, we see the pod people, the pod people. That's not.
They're adorable. I don't think they're the pod people. They're adorable though.
The podlings that raised Kira all speak their own language. Kira was found by them as an infant and raised by them. How is she able to speak the same language that Jen speaks? Even though none of those podlings are shown to be able to speak that language because Kira has to translate for them.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. What I discovered in this viewing, and we'll talk about it in a moment. What I discovered in this viewing is that it is a wonderful mess, but it is not the best written fantasy we're ever going to get. And it's certainly
lovely to look at.
It's really nice to look at, and also from a D&D perspective, if you don't want to play a halfling, that's essentially Jen. I don't know what the fuck's wrong with you. I come out of this movie going, that is what I want my halfling to do. I want him to have a flute. I want him to run in and out of things, in and out of buildings very fast, skirting under things. You know what I mean? But I think that's the thing about it. Joe comments, I watched this movie in theater in 82, 6 years old with a group of friends and some parents. Some parts freaked me the hell out, but I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Yeah, there is darkness. The darkness that Frank Oz and Jim Henson are going for is a Grimm's fairy tale darkness. It's I know we were raised on Cinderella Disney films, but in the original Grimm fairy tale, the sisters cut off their feet to fit in the glass slipper. So, Little Mermaid died. So these are all things. But what I would say is the truth and the truth that is in Jim Henson's movie, is an amazing thing. One of the things you do have to talk about, we always have to talk about, is that from a production standpoint, and I want to bring this up because I know you know the name, and I don't know that everybody knows the name, but they should. This movie is produced by a man named Gary Kurtz. This movie occurs in 1982. There's another movie coming out in 1983 called The Return of the Jedi that Gary Kurtz is not going to be working on. And so part of me, and why is that important, Rich? To me, when I see Gary Kurtz's name on something, there is a seal of quality that goes with Gary Kurtz and his production prowess. He produced a little movie called The Empire Strikes Back. He was also one of the only people that could tell George Lucas to go pound salt. You know what I mean? What you're doing is crazy.
Production partner, I think, all the way back to at least American Graffiti, if not THX 1.
Right, and he was one of the few people that could walk into a room with George Lucas and go, "No, we're not doing that."
He was a governor on Lucas's impulses, and I would argue a much needed one. Because once
Well,
Rick
right, because
McCallum
once
showed up for the prequels, Rick McCallum just said yes all the time and indulged
anything
all
to the worst impulses. But what I would say is for folks who don't understand or know about Gary Kurtz, this is a very like while it's not as great a script or whatever, the world building is there and it's a controlled world building. And I would argue that Kurtz left. He worked on Empire Strikes Back, and him and George Lucas had a major falling out after Empire Strikes Back, where basically Gary Kurtz said, "You're either going to make really good movies, or you're going to make kids' toys." And Lucas said,
well,
"I think I can make," and they had a falling out. And
one of
I
the
think
bones of contention, one of the bones of contention there was when Lucas says, "Okay, and the Empire is building another Death Star," and Gary Kurtz was like, "We've done that. Let's do something else." And Lucas was like, "No, no, no, and they're building a second Death Star."
Where I found real interest in this is that Gary Kurtz is helping Jim Henson build a world, and he has left the side of George Lucas, and it doesn't leave my mind that while 1982 has the Dark Crystal and a fully realized Jim Henson vision, we get Return of the Jedi, which is still a good Star Wars film, but it is not The Empire Strikes Back, and it is not A New Hope. And so the wheels were a little bit off, and he's a very important producer in the history of Hollywood that I don't think gets all the credit. And when people bitch about Star Wars films, what I would say to them is, once we lost Kurtz and Lucas lost that voice, the person willing to go, no, your impulse is wrong. Actors don't want to act with blue screen, or actors don't like. I remember one of the stories I think was from Star Wars, right? Kurtz is working on Star Wars, and they had the Jabba the Hutt scene that gets added to the special edition, right? And basically, Ford is like upset about something, and he goes to Ford and he says, "Look, do the scene the way he wants you to do it, and then the second take, do it the way you want to do it." And Ford goes, "Okay." And I also think it happened on Empire, right? Where Ford basically, the "I love you, I know" thing, basically Kurtz gave Ford permission to go, say what you want to say. And he goes, "I don't," because the original script for Han Solo in Empire is basically a much longer version, like a giant diatribe, like a monologue. And Ford went to Lucas and said, "No, it should be, 'I love you, I know,' and that should be it." And Kurt said, "Go with that instinct." And they did. I guess they did a take where Ford did a whole thing where it was this long diatribe, and then they did "I love you, I know," and we know which one won.
We know which one works better,
and we know which one is now the gold standard by which we judge badass romantic gestures, right? Like, so Kurtz is a very important, like when I look back at like film history, Kurtz is super important. And I think the idea that he's working with Jim Henson here, it's like he moved on from one genius to the next, right? And it's a real interesting, he's a real interesting story. It's amazing, actually.
Two other names in the credits that I saw that I always like to point out under additional performers, which basically is like if they were doing the walking mystics or the walking Skeksis in long shots or whatever. Two little people performers, Jack Purvis and Deep Roy. Jack Purvis, of course, he did a lot of worked on all the Star Wars films. He played an Ugnaught. I think he played a Jawa. And
also in Time Bandits.
Most famously was in Time Bandits, yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And then Deep Roy, another, little person actor who has been in everything, from the 1980 Flash Gordon through Tim Burton's
Charlie
in the Chocolate Factory, where he played all the Oompa Loompas. And I think he did a wonderful job there. And he's in Neverending Story. He's in a bunch of stuff. And
he is the snail rider in Neverending Story, right?
It's almost impossible to do a movie that you have more than one little person in it without having Deep Roy showing up. And he's somebody, I've never seen him really interviewed or anything like that. And I'm like, why? People get on this. I'd love to hear his whole story. I'd love to hear. It would be great.
the last production thing I'd mention, and it's kind of an interesting thing. Two things actually. Oswald Morris is the cinematographer. It's the last film he ever shot.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was retiring, but he used the camera. He used a light flex camera, and basically he had a unit placed in front of the camera which gave a color tint so that it looked like a fairy tale, which I think is perfect. It gave it atmosphere. And then the other interesting thing you dig up is that after the filming was complete, ITC Entertainment, which if you remember the ITC logo was like 3 spinning letters ITC, they were sold. And basically they were producers on this movie. At some point, Henson had to buy the movie and release it with his own money.
Yeah.
Because basically ITC Entertainment went tits up.
Yeah. Well, that was Sir Lou Grade, if I'm remembering this correctly, who was also ITC also produced The Muppet Show. So that's basically, kind of it just, Jim Henson remaining in-house with the company. ITC also did Space 1999, I think. And probably
they were a very good production firm.
Anderson shows there as well.
But they were sold, and they didn't like what they saw. And it, it's kind of it's a tad foreboding.
We understand how this works.
It's a tad foreboding. Because then the movie comes out. It's a tad foreboding, Rich. So here's the thing. What I love about the '80s movies is that they're challenging. What I also love about the '80s movies is some of the times they don't hit. Right? Some of the times where like you look up and you go, wow, how much was spent? What happened? Why did it not do as well as we thought? Like in our heads, like everything from the '80s. I don't know about you, but every time we go into these things where I go, how much money did that make? I'm way off. I'm usually incredibly way off. Like the night we had, I think the most shocking night was I had no idea An Officer and a Gentleman made that much money. Like I had no concept in my head, Rich, where that movie could make that much money, right?
Well, that's kind of a movie. Well, to tangent off there for a second, that kind of movie these days wouldn't make that kind of money, I don't think. It's a mid-budget movie. It's a mid-range movie. It appeals mostly to adults. It just wouldn't get that kind of traction. This is something a studio would make and say, shit, we got to throw this on a streaming platform because no one's going to the theater for it.
So this movie grosses right. This movie grosses $40 million, roughly $41 million. The inflated adjusted box office is 122. So we're talking a pretty big hit for the '80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Opening weekend, it's on 858 theaters. It is one of the rare 82 movies that we talked about that expanded out. So it eventually got out to 1,052 theaters, but only opened on 858. Its opening weekend was only $4.6 million. So it lasted about 7 weeks in theaters. And expanded. So it is a rare box office okay answer. Now the thing is, this movie opens and it has everything breathing down its neck. It opens against Tootsie and the Toy, which by the way, I don't know if you know this, Rich. I'm gonna say this for you. I think you do, but this is next week's movie. And then this is the week after. So both these movies that we're talking about, Tootsie and the Toy, by the way, we're going to be discussing in the next couple weeks, and they're basically we're talking about dealing with it kind of crippled the movie we're talking about tonight at the box office. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird kind of it's a weird thing. But it did okay. It came out around Christmas. This is one of the closest to box office dates 40 years to the day on our program. We're only 3 days off. It actually opened December 17th, 1982. So this is actually one of our closest box office days.
I mean, we tried to do it better before, and then it was just, but.
But in its third week, it moved up to second place. So like, the Toy and Tootsie dominate the end of the year for box office, but in its second week, it moves up to second place and jumps over the Toy, which is a little bit of an inclination of what's going to happen next week when we talk about the Toy for Christmas. But one of the things that this movie also has going for it, it is one of the headliners with regards to VHS, Betamax, Laserdisc, any of the major video things, and even when it was acquired by Jim Henson Video and re-released, and it gets the distinction of being one of the movies that gets watched and rewatched and watched again and rewatched and bought and rewatched and bought. It has Blu-rays. I am surprised it doesn't have a 4K release. Well, I don't know what you would really do, because it really does look okay when you rewatch it now, right? It doesn't look bad at all. But the box office for it doesn't necessarily justify how much it cost. So it grosses $40 million. It does cost, I think I was looking at it. I think it was something about $17 or $18 million. Right? Is the budget for it?
Which is pretty expensive.
That's very expensive.
Yeah.
For a glorified children's puppet movie, yes. Super expensive. A dark glorified children's puppet movie where there's torture, stealing one's essence to feed to an emperor, like in a juice bar kind of like weird way. But the box office doesn't do it near the justice with regards to other things. Like what I would say, one of the things that I think when we're talking about things and looking at things, it is a widely regarded movie, although at the time, the critical response is super interesting on it, right? The critical response is, of all the movies coming out, this is so dark. Almost all the negative reviews, and even some of the positive ones, right? Like I think my favorite, Richard Corliss of Time, says the invention is impressive, but there's little indication of the Henson Oz trademark, which is a sense of giddy fun. So even when they're making this world building, and even when they're doing this giant thing, people are still looking for Muppets. Like, and I think a funny thing could be like a Muppet Dark Crystal movie would be Fozzie going on a quest. Not saying I don't want to see it, Rich. I'm not saying to you I don't want to see it. But I think the review, like the negative reviews, are almost all this is way too dark for kids. Like, this is super dark. What'd you dig up? Did you dig up anything interesting?
Not really. I kind of hit a couple of those, this is too dark for kids things. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, kids were living still at that point. We're dealing with like the Cold War. We weren't quite having, like the weekly, atomic bomb drop and cover drills. But, it was still kind of like over our heads. And if, we were kind of semi-attuned to what our parents
we hadn't gotten to the morning after yet.
Yeah. Yeah, we
That'll date
still
you.
had the day after was also this year. So, that whole kind of vibe was probably in the air. So, I kind of go back and forth. I was 13 when this came out. And I think maybe I kind of bypassed this movie when it originally came out thinking kids movie. And, because I was, the really, smarter than you, hipster know-it-all 13-year-old, like all 13-year-olds are. I didn't know shit. I was an idiot.
Well, no, I think that's part of it. I am impressed. Like when you look at Rotten Tomatoes, we like to discuss a little bit. 77% positive tomatoes, right? Critic review. 81% audience score with over 100,000 ratings. So that means 81,000 people actively voted for the Dark Crystal. You know, Corliss also goes on to say, as narrative, the incidents in the Dark Crystal are unremarkable. As the excuse for special effects, fanciful decor, and eccentric characters, they do nicely enough. And that's the thing. I think the crazy world building that happens in this movie, and like you were saying, I think my review is exactly what like you're saying. It is an immersion film. It is a movie where you look at it and you go, are you going to be part of this world or you're not going to be part of this world? If you're going to be part of this world, you're going to buy in. And if you buy in, like, you're going to come out of this movie better for joining Kira and Jen on the journey.
No,
right?
I know I've been going through this whole evening sounding like I'm very negative on this film. I'm not, though. Ultimately, I think it's an incredible piece of filmmaking, even if it does have some deficiencies. I still like it. I own the Blu-ray. I kind of discovered it in college a few years, after it came out, even though I had been reading about it in like Starlog and some of the other, genre movie magazines of the time.
Cinema Fantasque?
Yeah. You
and I read the same goddamn magazines.
Fantasy
that's
Empire
scary.
was a great short-lived semi-pro zine. And so I look back, and I was like,
Fantastic. Fantastic was another one.
Yes.
Fantastic,
yeah.
Just,
I'm glad I came to it when I did in college, a few years later, because I had a little bit more experience. I don't think at age 13 I would have really appreciated it. I probably would have thought everybody is really screechy here. I can't deal with this. But I think,
I think you need an appreciation of like going to the idea of how much work has gone into these sets and how much work has gone into these creatures.
Oh, and it's fantastic. It's so
like,
beautiful.
And
even
like those
comments, like that opening shot with the Skeksis fortress on the plain and the lightning flashes in the river and stuff like that. That's a beautiful model.
And the lightning flashes in the river, and then it goes into the trickle, and it goes into the castle. It's beautiful.
And you have that beautiful cloud tank work above, with the rolling clouds and everything. That's it's all just amazing work. That's the kind of stuff I miss when I look at and I go, I miss good, hard, practical effects optically matted together. That's the kind of stuff I miss because I think it's just stunning. And as wonderful as computer generated imagery can be, and trust me, I've seen the absolute pinnacle of it, of the craft right now, and that's in Avatar: The Way of Water. This just has a certain appeal to me on a visceral aesthetic level.
I will tell you it's the pinnacle because I think the way the actors are talking about it is very aggressive. Like I watched Sigourney Weaver and I watched Zoe Saldana give interviews and late night interviews where it's not really, we don't really need to be serious here, right? Jimmy Kimmel made the mistake of calling it animation, and she's like, it's not animation. Don't say it that way. And Zoe Saldana did the exact same thing to Corden the next night. So, couple comments. As a teen, I like darker movies. I hated these teen John Hughes movies. We disagree there, Ken. I'm a big John Hughes fan, especially the darker John Hughes. And then Kathy writes, and I was the opposite, laugh out loud. So, Kathy, you're saying you weren't cool. You were a hipster nerd. Kathy's saying she's just the opposite. And then I grew to appreciate the darker movies later on in life. Yeah, the darker movies give you something to latch onto, something to hope for. And I think the biggest critique I can give the movie is that I think what happened, Rich, is that they put so much into the world building and how they're doing all these creatures that they didn't like. It's very much the Ebby Calvin Nuke LaLoosh thing, 5 cent head and $1 million arm, right? It's And I think you're right. The script is clunky. The narration's clunky. Like kids asking questions during narration is never easy. Like I literally had to pause. Just click.
I have to say though, I think we kind of lucked out in how we've been discussing this movie and the fact that Avatar: Way of Water is opening this week, because there's a lot of parallels there in terms of
somebody that does their own thing. Yeah. Cameron is very much Jim Henson-ish.
This is they're both very much singular visions of their creator. And
also they're both making cutting edge things. Like the puppets in this movie are cutting edge. And the puppets are amazing. Cameron's making cutting edge technology. I would.
Jim Henson was always very much about cutting edge of puppetry. With adding servos, and even later on in his life, he was doing some things where I'm trying to remember if it was on Muppets Tonight or if it was on the Jim Henson Hour, where he had like these Waldos, were just like like a basic hand thing, and it was wired to a computer, and in real time they were getting rough, rudimentary performance capture of like a parrot character, and he would be sitting there puppeting this with just like this little glove thing that was on his hand, and then you could see the parrot character on a separate screen. So he was looking at that
genius. He was incredible genius. And part of one of the bigger disappointments recently with Disney is the idea that we have not, like, we've had some Muppet things that were really good, and then they haven't done all they could with the Henson Studios. Last thing we got to talk about when we talk about this movie, or this, and the legacy. So first and foremost, it had a movie sequel that never got made, but it did have a Netflix show that lasted one season, right? Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, put up by Netflix. They spent a ton of money on it. It eventually got canceled. They do have a lot of prequel novels and prequel comic books that are very much a big basis for a lot of these things, where even like somebody like Gennady Tartakovsky, right? Basically, he's come in and tried to work with the property. There have been many tries and swipes and passes from comic book studios. The other major thing is that it is a fantasy film, and it is a dark fantasy film. So anything that comes after it has to be a swipe where he's giving you the go ahead. Jim Henson has said to you, hey, you can do something a little darker. So I'm going to give a legacy shout out. And we don't get the Black Cauldron, or some of the darker indie Disney titles, and some of the darker things we're going to see, like something as silly as Crawl, which is a total world building thing on a different level, but same kind of build, right? It's got all the components to it.
Yeah. I would suggest too that the legacy of this movie is a lot of people who saw it at the right age, we'll call it in their tweens, what have you, grew up, showed it to their kids, and it's become a generational thing in part. And it's become, at least somewhat entrenched in the overall cultural zeitgeist, because at the Henson exhibit at the Smithsonian, they have two Skeksis set up. At least they did several years back when I was there. And they also, at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, New York, they have an entire permanent Henson exhibit. And so, of course, I was there when I had a chance, and walked through everything. And among the original, the Kermit used in the Muppet movie, and they show how that's Henson did the setup for like Kermit sitting in the swamp singing, among open notebooks of like them jotting down ideas for the Muppet Show. And I'm just like, can I just turn the page and keep reading this notebook? that kind of stuff. They had some Dark Crystal stuff there too. Now, the Netflix show was just starting to hit at the same time, so they might have just filtered some of the Dark Crystal stuff in to tie in with that. I don't know. I don't know if it's still there or not. But for these two important museums to devote space to it, I think speaks to its cultural impact.
Well, and
and
I think
resonates through.
I think that legacy side of it is that yes, Jim Henson did the Muppets, and yes, Jim Henson did Sesame Street, but Jim Henson was a master puppeteer who was also trying to do a great many things, right? So this legacy portion of it is just the master at work with all the creatures designed and all the different things. Like one of the things that you don't think about when you're watching it, but like not the rock guys, but like the crab guys that are kind of like the Skeksis, like informers, yeah, like informants or mob boss guys, muscle. What you found out is you had to have a puppeteer in it, but the puppeteer had his head down and everything around and controlled everything with a servo, so it could move the head, but he also had to roll and do things like just a bunch of stuff where they created it. So the legacy is it makes him a bigger version, because what happens is you start out with the Muppets and then you find out the Henson Creature Shop has done all these other things, like like Fraggle Rock or whatever, and it ties into that legacy, the bigger overall legacy that this guy just knew how to create interesting, incredibly well-designed puppets that took on a life of their own. And this movie is a beautiful representation of that.
I would suggest even the complexity of these creations, of the Mystics, of the Skeksis, was at a certain level. And if the Henson Creature Shop, and especially Frank Oz as co-director on this movie, hadn't reached that level, Frank Oz would never have been able to go on to do the far more complex job of creating the Audrey 2 in Little Shop of Horrors just a few years later. Because that thing needed like a dozen puppeteers all working various things in the lip movement and the head of the plant, as well as all the vines and everything. That was an incredibly complex job. And if the groundwork for, multi-puppeteer characters wasn't laid here, they never would have been able to pull it off the way they did. I would say, it's just, again, that we always are seeing movies, that we've talked about here through 1982 that are building foundations and laying the groundwork for other movies to build upon and, do even grander things and bring grander visions to the big screen for us.
And some other legacy things that are actually occurring recently. They're actually working on a role-playing game set in the world, right? And
really?
I think the River Horse Company is the name of it. They're working on a role-playing game set in the world of the Dark Crystal Adventure game is what they're calling it.
Huh.
They're also, and this is a weird thing, but the Royal Opera House is doing a ballet called the Dark Crystal Odyssey. This was as of March 2021. Wayne McGregor is doing the ballet, and he described it as a coming of age story for family audiences. So it is a movie when you experience it and you get it and you pass it out to others, and especially like-minded people. And, to a certain extent, the viability of creating all these different creatures on screen, it has to tie in a little bit to Lord of the Rings or some of the things we've gotten recently, Harry Potter. Like when they do a creature design for Harry Potter, when they're like working on Fantastic Beasts, which we're never going to have to see again, or I'm sorry, that was a dig at Fantastic Beasts. That was mean spirited. That was bad, JW. That was mean spirited.
A little bit, yeah.
It was a little bit mean spirited. But every time you get a creature in a fantasy film, somewhere someone has seen a Jim Henson production.
Oh God,
right? And oftentimes when they do interviews, or like they talk about the Dark Crystal, or they bring it up, and it's a great movie, and it's it has zero fucks to be given about being a kids movie. It is flat out just a straight adventure movie, right? And I think it's one of the great ones, and it's also one of the ones where people tend to get a little bit confused, and maybe they saw it and they weren't ready for it like you were, or maybe they saw it later in life and they show it to their kids and their kids might have problems processing it, like it happened to me. Because it is dark. It's so dark. Like Rich, trying to explain to a kid why you're taking the essence out of somebody is, yeah. It's like I once showed my sibling, when they were 7 or 8, I showed them Gremlins, and my wife walked in, and as we were watching it, she goes, "Isn't this the scene where she talks about her dad?" And I looked at him, and she goes, she sent our sibling out of the room, and and she goes, "Yeah, fast forward it, smart guy." You know what I mean? So you get inadvertently caught up. But the darker stuff is what kids not being safe is another legacy piece that has to be brought into. We don't have that anymore. We simply don't have it in the '80s films. There was a lot of danger, and that's one of the great things about them. Okay. So business for us, that was a Dark Crystal. Business for us that we have to discuss. First business, we're going to get this out of the way. We have a very good friend. He does a good show on Friday nights. His name is Brandon. No, what did I do? I did the wrong. Get rid of that. He has a big show coming up on this Friday night. He has Richard Norton coming on, who's an actor, fight choreographer, martial artist. You may have seen him in The Octagon, Millionaires Express. He did some work on
Express is a great Hong Kong action film. I would highly recommend to people.
Mr. Nice Guy and Mad Max Fury Road. So Brandon Brooks, a great show, IOU, Industry Outlaws United on Friday night.
Mr. Nice Guy, of course, is Jackie Chan.
This guy's a really talented fight choreographer. So if you have questions about how those things are done, Brandon usually does a really good deep dive and gives a really great interview. So that's coming up on Friday night on the Indie Escape Network. I'm a big fan of Brandon. Brandon is one of those guys that I've met twice, in various places online and stuff, just going over show ideas and things. And he's super nice. I've worked with him a couple times. Got to produce a show once. So that's happening for him. Mm-hmm. Next week for us, we have this. We have this movie. This weird movie.
It does not have a great reputation.
It's funny as hell, though. It's funny as hell, Rich.
Forever, so I'm actually looking forward to sitting.
Here's the thing: I'm a huge closet Jackie Gleason fan, and I love Richard Pryor movies. But this movie is weird. It's because it's, I don't know. It's weird. It's about buying somebody. It's about buying somebody to take care of your kid. Like it's fucking weird, Rich. But it's called The Toy. It's directed by Richard Donner. It's Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason, who are maybe better separate. We also this also movie. Just so we're clear, we might have to have him on to talk about it. But this has a weird tie to the Indie Escape Network's own Joe Ridgely, because he lost this role. This role is played by Scott Schwartz. This person right here in the center of the screen, lighting a fire to Richard Pryor's foot, beat out Joe Ridgely for this role. So I might have to ask him some questions about his audition. But that movie's coming up this week or next week for Christmas. And then the last movie of the year. Ready? Boom. An incredible piece of work. A wonderful comedy starring Dustin Hoffman, uncredited Bill Murray, Terry Garr, Jessica Lange.
Great Dabney Coleman.
A fantastic Dabney Coleman. A very young Gina Davis. and just so many people. One of the great American comedies that's coming up for New Year's week, my birthday week. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, and that's coming up now. Also, before we get to the end, we got to talk about this a little bit.
Yep.
Rich and I are doing Bond stuff for January. So what we're looking at, you have Connery here, Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and Daniel Craig. What we're trying to do is to do a nice eclectic stroll through Bond memory lane.
And we want you, the viewer, to kind of help us pick which Bond from each era
from each era. So obviously Lazenby has to be one of them on Her Majesty's Secret Service, because he only has one. But everybody else, we're going to open it up. We already have a pull up for the Connery Bonds, and we're going to get I'll have the other polls up by the end of the week. But we would like an idea, and even if you want to put a comment in, I vote for this Bond for Connery, or I vote for this Bond for anybody. We'll take the votes wherever we can get them. And that is a great way to end it. Where can people find so much stuff? Because I know you're going to have a Cavill story, like right after we get done with the show. So where can people find your stuff?
Like that.
Where can people find you, Rich Drees, my glorious co-host?
All of my writing is at FILMBUFFonline.com, including my Avatar review, which dropped yesterday. And then on, what's today? Wednesday? On Friday, I will have a review dropping of the new Damon Chazelle movie, Babylon, which opens next week. Oh boy, that's a movie. Let me tell you, that's another 3 hours of craziness.
Heard it's smutty. Heard it's gloriously smutty.
Oh, there are parts. That's all I can say right now.
Got an embargo, I tell you. Hey, can I ask you a question? You were talking a couple weeks ago. You were talking about the voting for the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle. Did we get what you guys voted for, or do we? When does that drop?
It's on my list to get to.
Sorry.
Well, first of all, I wanted to throw a plug for the other podcast I do with my co-host Natasha Bogutsky, the Big Picture Podcast. We're on a couple of week break because of various projects that we've been kind of working on that got in the way. But hopefully we'll be back soon. I want to get one more in before the end of the year, and I think we will. But you can listen to past episodes at bigpicturepod.com or on the link at filmbuffonline.com. As JW just said, I'm a member of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle. We are in the process right now of voting for our best of the year. We've watched all the movies, we've done our nominations, and now we're just kind of sitting around thinking about how we want to rank some of these choices. And I have to figure that out by Friday at midnight, because on Saturday afternoon, we will announce our best of the year for our critics group. I'll probably throw out a link to that when that happens on Twitter, and leads me to my handle of my Twitter handle of @FilmBuffRich on Twitter. You can also follow the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle on Twitter. They have a website you can check out as well. So if you're interested in, what some of my colleagues are thinking about in terms of best of the year, please feel free to check that out. And you might even see some films on there that you're like, I don't think I've heard of that. But I guarantee you, just looking at all the nominees, and I can't really say who the nominees are, but all of the nominees I think are entirely worthwhile. So even if the ones that I wind up voting for don't win, there's still going to be really good movies on that best of list.
I don't want to get into it. I just want to get an idea of it. I don't want to know the actual movies that are being voted on. Do you guys do you have a start with a list of like 200 movies released for the year, and then they give you a list 10 or 15 that you have to pick?
We can, for our nomination process, we can nominate anything we saw during the year that was a 2022 release, whether we saw it at Sundance, back in January, or we saw it.
Will it be a consensus then? Will, like, whatever movies make every critic's list? How does that work?
For our nominations, yeah, it would be like, say, for example, I'm gonna pick something from a previous year when I remember.
Yeah, last year.
Say for example, out of all the critics,
King Richard.
7. Okay, say there's 20 in our group, random number, and 18 said, I'm gonna nominate King Richard in Best Picture. Then yeah, obviously it would be. And it's basically, I think it's the top 5 vote getters in each category, which would be.
And then they'll come to you and say you have to vote on pick one of these.
Yeah, boom, and then we vote there. And we get to nominate. Do you have the
amount right now? Do you have the actual nominees that you have to pick?
Yeah. I can't talk about them, but yeah, I got the email on Sunday, and that's all I've been doing is like the last couple of days is
just trying to hash it out.
Yeah. Ooh, and this is why I have tended in the past not to do like best of the year lists, because I
was talking about on Loud and Nerdy tonight. I think I'm gonna do a 10 best shows next week, and the following week I'm gonna do 10 best movies that I saw in 2022. Mm-hmm. So great. If you want to find me, I am JW the Movie Guy on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a Loud Nerdy the page and Loud Nerdy the group. Great things go on in the Loud Nerdy group, including, but not limited to, stuff like tonight, which was give me your favorite Christmas protagonist. Clark Griswold won over George Bailey, and also over other people. Buddy the Elf. What was that? John McClane. John McClane was way down. John McClane tied with, fuck people. I can't stand people who don't think it's don't think. The 3 that I'm pushing hard for Christmas movies, Die Hard, Gremlins, and Batman Returns, are all by any connotation Christmas movies. Mm-hmm. And when somebody goes, well, what do you mean they don't? How can you have Batman as a Christmas movie? What I would say is, ask them how important mistletoe is to the film. Thrown out there. Is mistletoe tied to any other holiday? Mm-hmm. Nope. Is it a Christmas party that everybody realizes what the problem is at the end of the movie? Is it a giant Christmas party? Okay. Anyway, moving on. Just it drives me bonkers. But we do Loud Nerdy the group, Loud Nerdy the page, all kinds of cool things going on there. We also spun out the Whamageddon page from that. So I got nailed. I got crushed last night, 2 nights ago. Because I was doing my Wordle and I was also doing my Framed, and I was watching. I think I was watching Colbert, and there was a commercial for goddamn Mariah Carey. And so it's Whamageddon this year. So, but you can find us on all those things. And we want to thank everybody at the Indie Escape Network and everybody for watching the show. We appreciate you joining us. Next week we got a big show with the toy. And then we're working on Bond and doing some different things. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay out of trouble.
Thank you so much, folks.
Have a great